Hello, everybody. In today's episode, we're discussing the 9 characteristics of great businesses. We'll cover why great companies have a reason for being, why they excel at being trustworthy, they know who their ideal stakeholders are and build high trust relationships with every one of them. They don't try to be all things to all people, play the long game, or more likely, the infinite game. They're focused, they're well-run day to day, week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter, year to year. They're built on agreements and are built to last. We will segment all of those into chapters so you can jump around if you'd like. Thank you and enjoy. Nine characteristics of great businesses.
Love this topic.
Yeah, so we've written about this before. You've written about this.
Yep.
I always think it's funny that we do things as 9.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a real reason that this is 9? Like, is that just how many you think there are, like 9 core competencies, or do we just really like the theme of 9?
If it works, awesome. If it doesn't work, then it doesn't work, is my perspective, right? So
you're not going to force it.
I don't think we've ever forced it.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Just a lucky number for us.
It's just a lucky number. Yeah. I mean, I think, as you know, and lots of people know in the company, I don't like even numbers. And so there's that thing. But I mean, I'm talking like less than 20 kind of numbers, right? So every now and then, like I'll put together a list of 8 and then I'll say number 9 is I don't like even numbers. And that's the 9th reason. So, but, so I do play around a little bit, but not much when it comes to something like this.
7 would be acceptable.
7 would be acceptable.
So
7's a good number.
I always remember it being like chairs. And then you thinking a house is ugly because there's 4 chairs outside or something ridiculous. So that's why the odd number thing is very ingrained in my memory. Yeah. But regarding the 9, does the order of these matter before we get into it, or?
To some extent, right? But I think when I wrote the article, I tried to put them in the best order that I could, but it's not like stages where this is first and this is second.
Successive.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
but we can talk about that as we go through it.
Yeah,
a little bit.
All right.
Yeah.
So starting number 1.
Number 1.
Great companies have a reason for being.
Yeah. This is the compelling why. I deeply believe great companies make the world a better place, and so they attract and retain ideal stakeholders who, at their core, want to see the company endure, right? And so, I think the great companies, they have a strong sense of who they are and how they fit into the world and where the world's going and how they'll continue to fit into the world and how they'll continue to help the world become a better and better place. So, I deeply believe that great companies deserve to exist and should exist.
And when you see companies that are started or around,
right,
that don't have a strong reason for being, they don't have that compelling why.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Well,
it manifests itself in a number of different ways. One of which is it's harder to attract and retain, great talent. It's harder to grow. It's harder to find people that are aligned with, what you're doing and why you're doing things. So ultimately it manifests itself in, higher turnover, more difficult to grow revenues, you hit the ceilings and it's tougher to break through them in terms of the stages of development. You don't quite know how to position the company versus, potential competitors or real competitors. Culturally, it's got, issues which, tend to end up with some turnover issues or internal dynamics that are not particularly healthy. There's not alignment at the senior leadership team, and as goes the leadership team, so goes the whole company. So it manifests itself, I believe, across all the dimensions, the core dimensions of what it takes to be a great company.
And also feel like starting, right, it goes back to that thing of you don't make money because you want to make money because people value what you do.
Yeah.
And if you're just want to go out and make money, do you think that that's a reason for being?
No, right? For the reason you just said, because you're focusing on outputs rather than inputs. And how many times have I talked about, the research on happiness, right? If you want to be happy, if that's what you're focused on, you're not focusing on the right things. You need to focus on the things that actually make you happy. Doing things that you are good at doing things that you feel like matter, doing things that you find interesting. And so if you're just focusing on profits, in my opinion, you're focusing on the wrong things. Now, you need to have a high level of confidence that if you do the things right, that you understand who you are and how you serve and how you make the world a better place, and you get everybody around the table to be on the same page, then all of a sudden, guess what's going to happen, right? Especially if you understand why you should exist, right? Is there a need that can be fulfilled? Do you have a point of view on how to best fulfill it? And so once you have those things, and if you do them well, and you surround yourself with people who care about what you're doing, my experience is, the profits will come.
And I think it's going back to the happiness thing. And a lot of people don't realize is dopamine, the thing that makes you feel good.
Right.
That the reward pathway for that is you have a thing that you want or an area or goal you're trying to achieve. And you ideally, the healthy way to get dopamine is you progress towards that goal.
Mm-hmm.
And then that makes you feel good.
Right.
That might not be happy, but that's meaningful. That's fulfillment.
Right.
And you'll feel good doing that over the long term. And that's a sustainable happiness.
Right.
Versus you just going for something a little bit
a sugar kick.
Yeah. Right. You feel really good in the moment.
Yeah.
And we evolved to feel good with that because it's like we want to there was not an abundance of sugar cake for most of our evolution. So if you were able to get that many calories, then it's like awesome, you're not gonna die.
Yeah.
That's not the problem.
Right.
So and then all this stuff, then you're gonna feel like not your best after eating that.
Yeah.
But I do think it's right. Pick the thing. Have a goal, and progress towards that.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of happiness that we want to achieve in this arena.
Yeah. I mean, once again, I struggle with the word happiness, but I
agree. But
that's
the term.
Those are the milestones that give you confidence that you can go from here to there, and you're progressing. You feel good about the progress. You can measure the progress, and hopefully there are people cheering you along, right? As you're progressing. If you think about it, use a metaphor of a marathon as an example, right? You're it's not just that you're doing it by yourself. There's also people cheering on, and you're looking at your times and you're saying, hey, like the first time I ran really, really long distance, I was surprised. I was running, probably a minute faster per mile than I normally run, and it was easy, right? It was kind of weird almost.
Yeah, and there's even that reward is even stronger. It's like you're trying to get a 4-hour marathon,
right?
I've never run a marathon. I don't know what I'm talking about. You're trying to run a 4-hour marathon,
right?
And that's your expectation, and then your watch or whatever breaks, and then you finish it in 3.5. You're like, wow, that's amazing, right? You'll feel so much better because you exceeded that expectation.
Yeah,
and then obviously that's definitely for people that run marathons. It's part of a larger picture ambition.
Yeah.
But that all comes back to advancing your compelling why.
Yeah.
Right. That's the stuff that brings meaning. That's where the reason for being lies.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the things, and it probably sounds weird, but I'm good at doing that on occasion, right? But when you're working on stuff that you deeply believe is good for you and all of your ideal stakeholders and the world, right? 90+% of the time, you look in the mirror before you go to bed at night, and you feel pretty good about how you're playing the game, how you're participating in life, and so back to 90, right? I think that's a great thing.
I think that's a perfect segue in number 2. Great companies excel at being trustworthy.
Yeah. Well, this one's I know there's a lot of phrases I use all the time that I probably shouldn't use. especially when I'm writing. But one of them is it's at the risk of stating the obvious. Right. So at the risk of stating the obvious, it's virtually impossible to succeed without other people, just period. Right. We're social creatures. I like to say it takes thinkers, feelers, doers, and critics. It takes a bunch of people to create something of enduring value. And ultimately that means you're relying on other people, and other people are relying on you. And so at the core of that is developing high trust relationships, which we talk about all the time, right? The trust is around character, competency, and connection. And so you can't be, on the character stuff, that's pretty clear, although as I've written about a little bit and we'll share even more on in Work 9.0 and some other articles that'll come out ahead of time. The character stuff is a little bit different. The definition's a little bit different. The way it's judged is a little bit different in monochronic cultures versus polychronic cultures, or agreements-based cultures versus relationship-based cultures. But ultimately, if you don't trust someone, if you don't trust their intent, if you don't trust their integrity, it's hard to have a healthy relationship with them. That's one. Competency is people trust that you're going to, do the things that you said you're going to do. You're going to provide the value you told people you're going to provide. And then, the connection stuff is, all about, the cultural things, including the poly and monochronic stuff that we talk about a little bit, as well as shared goals and shared interests and shared behaviors and living up to agreements and, being there consistently and showing up, when you're supposed to show up. And so, ultimately, when you start to break that trust down, it's just harder for people to want to, work with you or buy from you or do business with you. And so, I deeply believe, and we've talked about this a lot over feels like years now, right? That you want to build high trust relationships with all of your ideal stakeholders. But to make that work, you need to get clear on who your ideal stakeholders are, because not everybody's going to be ideal. And so it's really super important to really focus on saying to yourself as a company, as a leadership team, ultimately getting everybody in the company to understand that, we're focused on serving and developing high trust relationships with our ideal stakeholders. These are our ideal stakeholders. And these other people, they're not ideal, right? We can't be all things to all people. I usually talk about the non-ideal stakeholders on the customer side is, it's a combination of people who aren't buying what you're selling, right? They just, you're delivering this much value. And they said, well, I only want to pay for this much value. It's like, well, that's not what we're doing. Right. We can talk about, I know one of the topics that you and I are geeking out on lately is luxury. Right. And so, there's, this better than I do, but there's various levels of luxury, and you need to be super clear on what level you're providing and how to communicate, not only communicate that, but then obviously on how to deliver on that, right? So that's one example. And the other example is, if you have customers who, are just like uncool to your people, right? That's not an ideal customer, right? Now, there's going to be situations where people will get upset, and understand that, yeah, we didn't do the best job we could have done. We weren't as competent as we normally are in that moment, and we apologize, and we'll do better, and you try to make make up for it. But if fundamentally that person isn't buying what you're selling, or they're just a bad human to have a relationship with, then they're not ideal. And take that feedback and just kind of dispose of it. Don't worry about it, and just really concentrate on developing high trust relationships with the folks who are ideal.
Yeah. On the luxury point, right? If
Yeah.
somebody goes into a Ferrari dealership, he's like, well, I'd buy the car if it were cheaper.
Yeah.
You're like, cool. You probably couldn't even buy the car if it was the price it is, because, it's like, there's a whole thing there.
Yeah.
But that's right. That's a very extreme example of that's not your ideal customer.
Right.
At all.
Right.
And it's just, it doesn't matter. And we have some of those experiences where it's like, well, we'd get 90 if it were, half the price. And
Yeah.
like, well, it's not.
Yeah.
And It's not going to be.
Yeah.
So, right. And there's a tendency for people to apologize in those kind of situations.
Yeah.
But you shouldn't apologize if
For
you have no intention of altering your behavior going forward.
Right.
Like, that's insincere. That's inauthentic. So don't do that.
Right.
But, right. And you're not going to earn trust by behaving in such a manner.
Yeah. No, they're just not buying what you're selling.
Yeah.
Right. And that's okay. Yeah. I think it's, you and I've had this conversation before. I think your generation's actually more at peace with this concept than my generation was, right? My generation tried to, help everybody, or at least satisfy everybody. It's like, no, right? Don't have guilt, or, if someone's can't afford a Ferrari and you're a Ferrari dealer, it's like,
I don't think it's a more evolved ego kind of thing with the new generation. I just think there's a lot of things going on there. We don't need to get into it.
Yeah.
But some of the reasons for that are not virtuous.
Yeah.
Say that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's right. You got it. And what would you say? Right, it's one of the characteristics of a great business.
Yeah.
But what are the characteristics? You say character, competency, connection.
Yeah.
But what would it look like for if a company is not doing great on the trustworthiness side of things?
Right.
What do they need to focus on?
Well, first of all, obviously, figure out whether it's character, competency, or connection. That's the first thing. And then, then it's like, okay, so let's just say it's competency, because that's a relatively easy one, right? All right. So it's like, where are we falling down in terms of delivering on what we're telling people we are delivering, right? And is it us, or is it the customer, or is it the positioning that we've put out there, right? So, you were talking earlier about someone, let's just say someone comes along and they say, well, I only want to pay, $5 because all I want is your meeting tool. Well, we're not a meetings tool company, right? We have an ecosystem, that includes obviously the software. It includes the content. It includes the support. It includes, collection of tools that collectively enable you to focus on building the things you should focus on, right? And not be dedicating your time to building things that someone else has already built really well, right? Like I've said before, a contractor building hammers and saws and screwdrivers at night, that's not what they should be focusing on, or during the day is even worse, right? They should be focused. We have the hammers and saws and screwdrivers, right, and levels and all the tools you need, right? So take advantage of what we're selling, but we're not selling individual hammers and screwdrivers, et cetera, right? So if you're coming to us just for an individual hammer or screwdriver, I get that that's what you're looking for, but that's not what we're selling, right? So is the competency issue, is it just a mismatch in their understanding, right? Are they not ideal? But if they're ideal, now you get into, okay, is it, are we not doing as good a job of positioning the business, or is it fundamentally that we've got a bad hammer?
Or you're over-promising and under-delivering.
Yeah, on what the hammer can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or that you have hammers. And it's like, well, I mean, you could use a level as a hammer. It's not a very good hammer.
Right. Right.
Speaking of ideal stakeholders, great companies know who their ideal stakeholders are and build high trust relationships with every one of them.
Yeah. So I kind of feel like we talked about that. I do believe you need, so we'll go there really swiftly, right? So I believe there are 7 types of ideal stakeholders.
There's going to be a lot of overlap here.
Yeah.
It's just so everyone's concerned.
So obviously we've got the customers, and we have the employees, and then you have vendors, and then you have strategic partners, and then you have investors, and then you have the community, right? And then who did I miss? Because I know there's 7, right?
Team members, customers, vendors, investors, strategic partners.
Strategic partners, yep. Employees.
And communities.
And communities, right? And
It's a
so,
good one.
yeah, those are important. Those are important. So, it's getting back to the
team members.
Team members, yeah. Getting back to the defining each of them, core values and culture, right? Are these the right people when it comes to your employees? Defining the psychographics and geographics and demographics associated with your ideal customer looks like. When it comes to investors, I deeply believe that you want to find investors who really truly appreciate, who you are, where you're going, how you intend to sort of get from here to there. What's the speed? Are you growing at 50%, 100%, 30%, 40%, right? What's the value you're delivering? Are they buying into the vision and into the plan? Strategic partners, I think they and by the way, all of them should be aligned with you culturally, generally speaking, right? And so, getting relatively clear on what the definitions of each of those things are is super helpful. Because if you don't have definitions, then you're going to find yourself being surrounded by some non-ideal people, and if you don't have definitions. And it's not just you have definitions, but everybody in the company has a general understanding, relatively speaking, right? Has a general understanding what those definitions are. So ultimately, I think it's really important to define them. It's really important for everybody in the company to have a decent understanding of them, to do everything they can once that they understand who they are, what the definition is. Then if they are an ideal stakeholder, remember, we're working on building a high trust relationship with them, and that's a long game. Right? It's an infinite game. And then, if we mess up, and we hopefully we've developed a decent high trust relationship with them, and they'll forgive us, because they know that we're trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, and I think the important part of that is that when you have that trust, right, it sort of humanizes your business.
Yeah.
And I like to think of trust as when you really trust somebody, you trust them for all the things that are wrong with them and everything. And it's in your mind and your subconscious, it just simplifies the thing that you trust, right? You're not trying to figure out their little fringe things. You have a lot of friends where it's like you've known them for forever.
Right.
And you have no idea what they think about politics or whatever.
Yeah.
Because you're just like, oh yeah, I trust them. And you're not worried about that. You're not trying to investigate that. Or you may not even know how old they are, like at all. And you never thought to ask because you trust them.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that Apple, for example, does a great job of, where they just keep everything really simple. And so you trust them.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things going on in the background. Like, I don't care.
Right.
That's cool. And that's one of the benefits of earning that trust.
Yeah. And the other thing is that trust, when you understand, when you have a decent understanding of the concept of trust, and then you go out and you do the work that's necessary to develop high trust relationships, right? Then you and the rest of your organization are a trust first organization, right? So you're not engaging in, well, I don't know if I trust you. And because that's going to send a signal. And that signal is, basically it's oxytocin based. And so it's like, well, if you don't trust me, I don't trust you, right? And so I believe it's really hard for companies to scale and develop just, a broad, collection of high trust relationships if you don't position everybody in the company to sort of approach the ideal customers on a trust first basis. And so when everybody in the company is approaching your customers, your ideal customers in particular, on a trust first basis, then, we've seen it for years and years now where, we get lots of people who say really nice things about us, right? Customers wise, and across lots of other ideal stakeholder sets. You talk about strategic partners, you talk about, our partnerships and our relationships with coaches as an example. They know we're trying to do right by them. And everybody in our company knows that these are people who are important to us, and they approach them, with a trust first orientation. I mean, you see it every single day.
And there is a contagious, it's not the right word,
right,
but there is a contagious effect of everyone internally putting trust first and having those high trust relationships and how that actualizes in the market with your stakeholders externally, right? There are benefits that ripple out of that.
Yeah. I mean, I had a relationship. I coached a company a long, long time ago. And the CEO, the founder, the CEO is 1,000% not a trust first human being. Right. And I worked so hard to help him, see the power of all this, and he just never, ever got over it. And that company was the most dysfunctional company I've ever worked with, right? And those dysfunctions were everywhere. And they weren't just internal, they were actually with their customers as well. Because, if you're working in a toxic place, and then that toxicity, it manifests itself externally as well. It's like, well, they don't care about me. I don't care about their customers, our customers, right? And so, but it really is more their customers, right? So it just like it spirals.
It's foundational, and you don't want to have a weak foundation.
Yeah,
you're not gonna have a healthy tree with bad roots.
Right. Yeah, that's an impossible thing.
Yeah. So moving on.
Mm-hmm.
We touched on this, but great companies don't try to be all things to all people.
Once again, and that's and once again, while it sounds obvious, right, it manifests itself in so many little areas too, right? So we experienced this, right, where we've got great people who really want to take care of our customers, and as a product-led company, we get a lot of feedback from our users. And while all of our users are super important, some of our users whose opinions matter a lot more than other users. And that sounds harsh to say, but the reality is that, someone so let's just say you got a company with 150 people in it, and you've got sort of entry-level people working in the company, and for whatever reason, right, maybe the company's not as advanced as it should be, in my opinion, but for whatever reason, they don't understand why, KPIs exist. And so they look at this KPIs as a micromanaging, controlling thing, right? And so they get, it's like, I don't like your software because you guys are, you guys are making me update my numbers every single week, and so they'll complain about they'll complain about the nature of the system, and part of me is like, ooh, man, I really want to help that company, help everybody in the company understand why they do the things that they do. I help them understand that the big idea here is these KPIs exist, and the best way to do this is they're here to help us see when there's an issue, because otherwise we just want to let you run and do your thing and solve problems the way that you're uniquely capable of solving problems. So they're not a micromanagement; they're a micro letting go piece of the framework here. You get that feedback, and and you can do one of two things with it, right? You can sort of try to explain it to them, but that's not our job, right? Ultimately, what we'd love to do is let the leadership team know that, hey, right, we're getting a lot of this feedback from your folks. And we would encourage you to help them understand the context around why you do the things that you do, and how you're trying to create this organization where things are working super well from top to bottom, so that you can continue to make the organization stronger and grow faster and give people more opportunities and have a super safe, vessel, for lack of a metaphor, that they're riding in and on. And so sometimes the feedback is like, it's like, okay, I get it, but what you really care about for us is making sure, the feedback that comes from a founder, as an example, because the vast majority of our clients are founders, right? That's super important feedback. And then as you sort of work your way down through the organization, right, we care, but there's so much context above that makes it like less and less useful for us. Whereas the pinnacle of the feedback that we focus on is the feedback from the senior leaders, right? Founder, integrator, super important. Senior leadership team, pretty darn important as well. And then it just gets a little bit coaches, yeah, 100%. And then it just gets a little bit less important as we make our way down the hierarchy of competencies.
We kind of touched on this,
yeah,
but I don't think we were as explicit as we could be on the sort of the 4 value propositions, right? Lowest cost, innovation,
yeah,
service, and status.
Right.
We kind of touched on those a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you want to go over those quickly in terms of the idea that you're going to excel at one of these if you try to excel at all of them?
Yeah, and my thinking on this has evolved a little bit. I think that you have to decide what your primary value proposition is, right? So some companies are have to continuously evolve the efficacy of their offering. So they're highly innovative. I mean, OpenAI right now, and everybody in generative AI has to be very, very focused on continuing to evolve their product, because you can see how it could become better and better and better and better, right? And you're like, well, if you give it to me, right, or they give it to me, right, you're going to lean towards who's ever continuing to advance the efficacy of that particular technology, right?
It's very quantifiable in that case.
Yeah, and I have a number of different frameworks, lenses, since I'm dealing with it all the time, through which I look and judge, right? So I really have a pretty darn good sense of how things are progressing. So that's on the innovator side, right? Then the classic is Walmart on the lowest cost. Right now, and then we used to talk about customer service, and it used to be Nordstrom was amazing. Your best example. Doesn't feel like they own that anymore.
I have no idea.
Right. So I don't know who owns great customer service exceptionally well these days.
Lexus is a car company, used to have great service.
They were amazing. Well, and then Tesla was actually amazing early on.
I think a lot of the higher end luxury things, like they take service very seriously.
Well, we're going to get into that in a second, right? And so then we have status, and status may not be fair, right? But the big idea behind status is people that are pursuing quality, right? Like we were talking about earlier, right? That the people who buy a Ferrari, or they'll go to who's the luxury resorts folks we talk about a lot. Aman, right? Is a good one in luggage.
There's a lot.
Yeah,
I like Rimowa. I would argue that's premium, ultra premium. Not
right?
Exactly luxury, but
yeah. And so
in terms of luggage, the other offerings like their slings and stuff, those are luxury.
And so then you have you have these primarily these 4 categories, and you no one can be great at all 4. So you need to sort of decide, what your compelling value proposition is. Where my thinking has evolved over the last decade or so is, you need to be really, really good, if not the leader, in one of those. But I think you also need to be pretty damn good in service, period, in the discussion. Yeah. Because service is where you hear from your ideal customers, right? And so I think you need to lead on one of those things, and then you need to be damn good in service, right? But you can't be the lowest cost, status.
Well, you can't be lowest cost and status, period.
Yeah, period, right? And you can't be innovation and lowest cost, period.
Yeah,
right.
And I have my. Are you ready to go through we did our principles on unitive brands thing?
Yeah. And
going through the research of, what resonates with everything, like what can apply to everything. And then the higher you go up in those things, right? In this case, speaking of Lovinger's stages of ego development.
Yes.
Lowest cost is probably not going to be in there, right? And I think the version that you could argue would be like convenience. So I think that's one of them. Like Amazon just sells convenience.
Right.
And kind of lowest cost.
Right.
But that's not the main point, is not lowest cost. Main point is convenience.
Yeah.
And I think that is long, and they have great service. And I think that long term works. But if you're just doing lowest cost and sacrificing customer service, it's like that's not a great long game.
Yeah,
that's gonna be a grind.
Yes.
If you're just like, I want to sacrifice 5 years or everything and try to build something off lowest cost, like great. Walmart's realizing that's not a great plan,
right?
Which is interesting to see that. McDonald's abandoned that forever ago,
right?
Like a quarter pounder's like $8 now or something. It's probably not, but it feels like last time I went, it was like, wow, this stuff's gotten more expensive. Now, it was a few years ago, but
I think part of it is I probably haven't done as much teaching on what lowest cost means, because it's not just the price.
Yeah.
Right.
On the market side of things, there are people that just like whatever the cheapest option is.
Yeah.
And so we know on the business side internally, or for those listening to this, your version of internally, it's a lot more than just price.
It is.
But on the consumer end, there's a lot of people that are just like, what's the cheapest thing? And that's all they care about.
Yeah. And but ultimately, when you lowest cost, as an example, does take into consideration convenience. As an example, it's because it's not just the cost of the product,
There's
right?
Some people that don't even, it would take lowest cost over convenience.
Right.
If you're going somewhere and you're bringing a bunch of coupons in to save $1 on deodorant or something, for example, right?
Yeah.
It's like, that's less convenient than you just spending the money. And Nate, I guess he has a great stand-up bit on this.
Yeah.
But it's like, some people will take that because they really value the lowest price over convenience. Yeah. Which is very fascinating to me. I want to just take it down that rabbit hole, but
right. Yeah. But when you're going through trying to figure out, your compelling value proposition, and you're trying to think through, what your number one and your second most important propositions are, if I am dealing with someone who wants to go down the lowest cost route, it's like you need to understand your ideal customer, and you need to understand what goes into the definition of lowest cost for them, right? Because is it lowest cost at that moment they buy it? Is it lowest cost because is a good product and it will last a long time? Is it convenient to get, et cetera? There's more that goes into that stuff, but there are definitely companies out there who sell something that, relatively speaking, is not expensive. And then there are other companies that have the same thing. I used to use, it's kind of weird now that I think about it out loud. I looked at investing in and lending to a toilet manufacturer a long time ago, right? And it was fascinating to get into that industry and see how people positioned themselves, because there were back then probably 6 or 7 different toilet manufacturers, right? Toilet bowl manufacturers. And you can think of some high end guys, and but then there was like some people really right down there. Just, it was a super basic porcelain, throne.
Yeah, and basic is right. If you want to do lowest cost, is what are the things you have to hit, and just focus solely on that. Don't add anything else that's going to drive up the cost. And
then when you went and investigated those, right, you sort of created a competitive matrix. One of the things that went into the ones who were doing well, they had a pretty good price point from a lowest cost perspective, but they also had they had a good reputation for it not falling apart, for it not the porcelain and the painting and the coloring and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So the industry knew that there was more than just the price that went into, and then there's the distributors, right, who sell it, and then it was like did they have a decent relationship with their distribution channels? And so there's a lot that goes into it. But this model, this framework that we're talking about is, it's a decent framework to start thinking through, what your value proposition is.
Moving on, great companies play the long game, or more likely the infinite game.
Yeah. So this is a huge one for me, right? So, we talk about forever agreements. I don't know if we talk about them every single podcast, but we talk about them a lot, right? And so great companies, they're focusing on some things that are virtually infinite. So, we talked about, we focus on helping ambitious leaders of small and mid-sized, companies organizations build great companies. And I believe that, that you're going to have small and mid-sized businesses for, virtually ever. So our ideal customer, I think they're going to be out there for a hell of a long time, right? And so first of all, it's, are you serving a forever market, right? Are ICPs part of a forever market? Is the value proposition that you're focusing on, right? Is that set up to be sort of a forever game for you to play, right? Can you compete on that forever? And if not, right, why not? And is this the value proposition then you should play? So that's a part of the infinite game. The cultural stuff is part of the infinite game. Are you building a culture that you believe could endure for, forever, right? Is this the type of culture that you could see being successful for 20, 50, 100 years.
And being capable of evolving throughout that time period along the company.
Yeah. With nominal change, right? I mean, over the years, we've tweaked a word here or there in terms of our 6 core values. But
the intent hasn't changed. It's just the way that we express it, because we're like, oh, okay, this resonates a lot better.
Yeah.
Or we set it up so it's more cohesive.
Yeah.
And then through doing that, we can make it more explicit.
Yeah. And then the compelling why. Is that something that is going to last forever? Because whether it's internally, all this is very explicit. Externally, it's more implicit. Not everybody knows, right? Obviously, our customers, all of our customers do not know our forever agreements. On the one hand, on the other hand, they certainly, I believe, can feel that, we're focused. The experience they have with us is very consistent. And they have an implicit sense that, who we are and how we do things and why we do the things that we do it's not changing.
Yeah. It's like going back to the trust thing. We want the cohesive resonance to be intuitively felt.
Yes.
Right? We don't need to burden them with this is all the things we do. We don't need to shout that.
Right.
So all of our actions, our behaviors, our products, all of our relationships should all be cohesive and evidence of those things. And you'll get a sense for it.
You'll get a sense for it.
It doesn't.
Well, it's
a lot of the stuff is if you want to know what it is, you go find it.
Yeah.
We'll make a lot of as we go through it, we'll make a lot of that more public and external facing.
Yeah.
But most people aren't going to care.
No,
and that's cool.
No, but if you wanted to go and find out more about us, you can go onto the website and learn more, about why we do the things that we do, and if you're interested in it. But this is an area where you and I think are highly aligned. Every now and then, we have great people, but sometimes people, they think that because they really appreciate who we are internally and explicitly, sometimes they'll communicate it externally, and it's kind of like, no, don't do that, right? Just because because to the point you were making earlier, we don't need to push who we are on people. We just need to be really good at doing what we do and understand why it's important internally. But don't sell. We're here. We're about them, not about us. And I think we and you and I both know we could be better at that. Yeah.
But it's nice. It's a weird thing to complain about that.
Yeah.
But it's nice to have people being very passionate about things, and that love is tangible.
Yeah.
But there is a difference between you just appreciating the thing and that positivity reflecting in your actions.
Yeah.
And you kind of boasting a little bit about it.
Yeah.
Right. It's like humility is just thinking of yourself less, kind of an idea.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, cool, great.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
But then do the thing that you need to do.
Yeah.
And in an ideal sense, that is helping you do the thing that you do.
And I think like the people who are responsible for, marketing and putting us out in the world, and to be fair, right? They're not doing it. it's a bunch of our colleagues who are doing it, and it's like you say, I love it. It's cool, right? And so I just think I'm not talking about us as much as I'm trying to help founders and ambitious leaders when they're thinking about this stuff, right? It's you should be thinking about the things and talking about the things that you're literally paying for, or when I say paying for, it could be either pay per click, or it's your advertising, or you're promoting, or whatever. You should be focusing on, what the customer cares about, right? And that's the angle. Don't be selling who you are, like all that stuff.
Don't fall prey to LinkedIn syndrome, or there's got to be a name for that.
Yeah,
that sort of a both bashful and obsequious behavior.
Yeah,
which is it's a fun spectator sport a little bit.
Yeah.
But refrain from doing that.
Yeah.
And it's a discipline consistency.
Yeah. And if your people are, they're saying great things, and obviously, that you should, that's awesome.
So we strayed a little bit from the infinite game here.
But back to the infinite game. So those are the 4 things, right? So compelling why, right?
Use that as a segue, but sure, continue.
All right. I'll let you segue.
No, you started it.
Right. So culture, right? That's an infinite game. The compelling why is an infinite game. Your ideal customer is an infinite game. And then your compelling value proposition. Those should all be part of your infinite game, right?
Yeah.
Because they're the soul of your company. And as we talked about in the Founders Mode series, that soul attracts and retains your ideal stakeholders. And in particularly, right, your investors, and it attracts and retains your employees, and obviously it should be attracting and retaining your customers. And if someone comes along and sort of changes one of those things, it's that you just changed the contract with a lot of people. So be very, very careful, especially if you're, not a non-founder CEO and you're coming in and you're like, I'm just going to put my stamp on this company. Well, Chesterton's fence, right? Don't rip something down unless you really truly understand why it was put up in the first place, and if you really truly understand whether it's a positive or a negative thing, and if it's a positive thing and it's part of what's attracted tons of people to you and retains tons of people for you, you better think a hell of a long time before you change that thing.
And in those things that we define as infinite games, you're focused on continuous improvement.
Yeah.
Right. You're not trying to rewrite the whole thing every time.
Right.
Because it's the compounding effect, consistent incremental improvement on all of those things.
Yeah.
And right, you want to win the games. You're not going to win all the games. And so when you don't, it's like, cool. Are we improving? Good. All right. That's good enough for me, because you want to win the summation of all the games.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
Like that's the meta game that you're playing. Right. So if you do that, and a big part of that, and the social component is you have to get invited back to play the games.
Yes.
So if you win and you're not a great winner, you don't get invited
obnoxious
back.
about it. Yeah.
It's like, well, you lost. You're out of the game.
Right.
So you lost.
Yeah.
That doesn't, right?
Right.
And so it's being very clear on what those infinite games are so that you can play them appropriately.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up compounding, right? Because that's the power of it all, right? It's you can make these incremental improvements, but because you're not changing things all the time, you get to take advantage of compounding understanding, compounding the strengths and the capabilities and the insights, and just like everything becomes second nature, and you're focusing on doing the things to expand and improve and progress, as opposed to thinking about which leg of my pants do I put on every single day, or worse, right? And so the power of compounding comes out of that. I also think that resiliency comes out of that, because you have confidence. It's been working for a long time, and so when you get hit, you say, okay, exactly where I'm supposed to be. I'm learning a lesson I need to learn, but it doesn't. Doesn't change who we are, right? So we get back up, and then finally, I do believe that when you have a long-term vision, not an infinite vision, but like a long-term vision on compelling, audacious goals as an example, plus you have the forever agreements, those things make it make it much more possible for you to be anti-fragile, right? Because if you don't know where you're going and you don't know what matters, right, then how do you learn the lesson? Right?
You have nothing to judge it against.
You have nothing.
If you don't have the ideal, it's like just such a great quote. It's like if you're on Earth and you're trying to advance things, but you can't ignore heaven, right? You can't ignore the ideal. But if you're only focused on heaven, but you ignore Earth,
right?
It's like you have no bearing on what is actually working. Completely butchered that. But the idea, right? You have to have the context of the present and then also a vision for the future.
Yeah.
And if you just try to focus on one over the other, you're just lost.
Yeah. Because if you don't know where you're going, if you don't know what matters, right, then there's no direction. And without that direction, how do you benefit from anti-fragility? How do you learn, right? Whereas if you have direction and then you get knocked down, and I'm just going to make a stupid metaphor here, you're climbing a 14er, right, a 14,000 foot mountain, and you learn a lesson. It's like, well, next time I should bring more water. I'm just making this up. Or next time I bring this, or I bring that, or I bring that, because I want to do this again, right? And so that's anti-fragility. It's learning from your mistakes and growing from them.
Yeah, and the infinite game is that you're going to climb more than one mountain.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, just as I like to
trying to become a better mountaineer, not just climb a mountain.
Well, and then so I like the mountain metaphor in terms of the stages of development, right? So each stage of development is a bigger mountain, right? And so so you learn from each of these stages the things that you need to learn. What you need to understand to climb a 4,000 foot mountain is very different than what you need to understand to climb a 14,000 foot mountain, which is very different than you need to understand, obviously, to climb Mount Everest, which is what, 28, 32,000, I don't know, way up there, 29,000.
Yeah, just like if you just drop somebody on K2, like, have fun.
Yeah.
That's not going to work. You can't do that.
No.
Right, but you got to work your way up.
Right. And as you're working your way up, right, and you're going from one sort of level of intensity, one level of sophistication, one level of challenge to the next level of challenge, right? You want to make sure that the people you're surrounding yourself with are people who either have been there and done it, right, or you're highly confident for a host of reasons have what it takes. Right. So, and specifically, let's go back to the Bloody Mountain metaphor. If you're climbing a 14er, you want to be with people who've at least climbed a 12er, but you don't want to be with people who've never climbed, never gone on a hike for an hour, as an example. Right. Just know. For
those who have seen 14 Peaks, right, Nims Purja, who's completely blown that whole thing out of the water since that was released. But like his team is so important to that thing. He stresses that all the time. It's like, you can't do it without that team.
Right.
And the backgrounds of all of them, where it's like, no, they can carry everything and more. And so when they are doing these crazy, it's a crazy challenge.
Right.
They're trying to do that in 6 months or something?
Yeah.
7 months? I think he did 6 something. I don't know. I haven't seen it in a while. But it's like they're at the point where like, oh, this is fun now. Where it's like, we're gonna go out, we're gonna party like the night before we climb Everest. And like, that's crazy. And then or on, I forget what mountain it was, but like somebody was dying, right, that they came across.
Yeah.
And so it's like he had to give them auction, someone else do the auction, right? Where it's like they're operating within their limits, and he knows everyone on the team is doing that.
Right.
So then when they do come into a situation where they have to help others,
yeah,
right, where they have to burden someone else's or bear someone else's burden,
yeah,
they are capable of doing that.
Yep.
And I tie that back into the core value side of things, where it's like extra mile means that you have a little bit left in the tank.
Yes.
So when we need to tap into that,
yes,
you're willing and able to.
Yep.
Lean in.
Yep. And it's our responsibility. It's part of our culture. It's our responsibility to make sure that everybody does have some extra in the tank.
Yeah.
Right. That's part of leadership.
So after that 10-minute tangent,
yeah,
great companies are focused. Which we talked about a lot, but
obviously, right? Yeah. So and throughout, right? So it's the big obvious things, the vision, all the things we've already talked about. It's really understanding structure, understanding how we do the things that we do, understanding, the goals that are in front of us, not throwing, as we lovingly say, non-rock rocks in the middle of a quarter. It's not overstressing. A company is this big machine. Hopefully a healthy, loving machine, right? A machine
machine.
An organic machine that everybody cares about. And we recognize that we're only as strong as our weakest link, And so, you're mindful of all these things and you create this complex, adaptive and growing system, and you have all of the pieces that they understand how they fit in, and they're focused on doing the work that needs to be done that they're responsible for. They're focused on the objectives to the extent they have objectives for the quarter. And then as leaders, our job is not to all of a sudden throw a bunch of crap in there that creates all this tension and anxiety and chaos.
Yeah, because you don't want to overwhelm the system.
No.
And if you think about it, right, you're trying to increase your level of fitness, and you want to work out, you want to train. If you overtrain, you're only going to make the system weaker.
Right.
And so things are anti-fragile, but to an extent.
Yeah.
Right. So if you go beyond that, you're only hurting the system. And so if you're like, more, better, you're like that Goggins mentality, like, who's going to carry the boats? And you do that 24 hours a day, that's not going to work.
No.
So, right. But focusing on the things that matter, eliminating things that don't, and really letting those embers turn into fire, turn into bonfires.
And it gets back to, one of the reasons why companies, were called 90. It's like amazing, great companies are marching 90 days at a time with, the leadership team, the departments, the teams, the individuals, everybody's marching 90% of the time, 90 days at a time. They're hitting 90% of the things that matter. And they're keeping the system basically, performing super well across 90% of all the things that, all the systems and all the processes and all the KPIs. And that they're obviously, and they're progressing those 90 days against a vision that includes a plan, that includes, maybe 10-year goals and 3-year goals and 1-year goals. And just this progress through focus, this progress, understanding what's important, this progress that also is built upon understanding what's not important, right? What are we not going to worry about? Yeah, we've got lots of stuff that we know we would love to do better, but we just can't, we care enough about one another and we listen well. So it's like, yeah, we can't do these things right now, right? And, I was talking to, our wonderful CTPO, Greg, just yesterday, and we were talking about how much we have going on right now and all these parallel activities. And, and I just looked at him and I said, is it too much? And he said, no, but, this is about as much as we can do. But it's, you're at that on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being overload, you're in the red in terms of stress and challenge. And 5 being, it's all good. And 3 being on board, right? We're like right at 8, which is where we don't want to get. We don't want to get above 8, right?
Well, we have the stuff on us. I don't know if I'm supposed to talk about it, but it seems like 7 is where we're running things. But right, I think it's 4 to 7. It might not be 7, whatever. It could be 8.
Right.
But in that range of like you're engaged.
Right.
But you're really getting close to, you're in eustress. You're really getting close to distress there.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's a good place to run it. And we're running a little hot right now, probably. Got a lot of change coming.
Yeah.
Which is uncomfortable.
Yep.
And a lot of things have to move around to facilitate that change.
Yeah.
But it is, I think, like we're running it hot. We're running it.
There's no question. Then it depends on every single, it's going to be a little bit different across the organization.
Yeah, every department's going to.
But yeah, we're in the 7 to 8 range, right? And you'd like to hit 8. That's okay. You don't want it going over 8. 8 to 1, 8 to 8, 3.
Red line.
Little red line, right? And ultimately, then this is part of the cool things that we're working on right now. Is that we have the assessment tool now, and and I want to have a meter on where we are company-wise, department-wise, team-wise, individual-wise, right? And, I would love to every single week to kind of know at the end of the week how things are, where are we on that meter? We will build that. Right.
Well, and then you apply like a mesocycle system to that, where it's like, okay, we're going to run at a 7 this quarter, but then we know that the next quarter or the next quarter, we're going to be running we're going to run an 8. So let's say we're running 8, and it's like, okay, well, then the next quarter, we're going to run it at a 6.
Yeah.
We're going to recover. We're going to get all those things going and apply that system.
Do you remember? So what was it? It was after the new 90, right? So the 90 that we
the rebrand, beginning of 23.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that when after we went through all the issues with the OS and we came out of that, right? That was supposed to be that first quarter and that second quarter were supposed to be recovery quarters. But because of all the work that was done, the response to all the work that was done was pretty intense from our customer base. Yeah. And so so the team didn't really have the recovery quarter that it wanted. And so, and I've been reminded of that on occasion. So we always say this, that we want to have a recovery quarter, but we haven't had one.
I think we can do it departmentally.
Yeah.
I think this is so whatever,
right.
Far out kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know anyone's doing this.
Right.
I'm sure there are people that are doing this, maybe not explicitly, but
right.
Off of instinct, but really applying that schedule. And right, because it's like if you're an Olympic athlete, you're going to be operating on those mesocycles.
Yeah.
And so you can't just be in your peak quarter.
Right.
Because usually it's like 90 days, right? It's a season.
Yeah.
You're not going to be in that all year. It's like
right.
you perform, then you go to recover, then you build, then you prepare, then you perform.
Yeah.
That's definitely not the 4 things, but it's something like that.
Yeah.
And so I think most of the departments could follow that yearly thing, or at least a semi-annual style of like perform, recover, right? We'll figure it out. But that's one of those things where that'd be really interesting to have the data on it.
Yes.
Be able to test it, prove it, understand it, and then eventually like teach that.
Yeah.
Right. As the goal with pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Well, that'd be fun.
Well, we'll do it.
Yeah. It will be fun.
Yeah.
We'll do it. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
All right. We're going slower than I'd like here.
I'm sorry.
No, it's not your fault. Great companies are well run day to day, week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter, and year to year.
Yeah. Right. And I think we just got in, broke that down pretty well. Right. And then the question is, are you the senior leadership team? Are you mindful? Do you understand how you're doing day to day, week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter, year to year, right? And I don't believe you can be a great company. I just don't, without having discipline around the week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter, year to year. I don't know, you have to have
quarters. The quarters made up of months. So it's the compounding. If you slack off on the compounding, you're like, we have a great vision for the year. And then like 3 weeks go by, you haven't done anything on a company level, right? But that's small,
right?
But the effects of that are significant if you extrapolate it, but also even if you start on week 4 and try to get back, it's like, well, you lost 3 weeks. It's probably gonna take 6 weeks to get back to where you were at week 0.
Right.
So you just lost 9 weeks.
Right. And you've lost all the power of the compounding. Number one.
So right now you're at 3 quarters, and then in terms of if we look at the compounding, it's like, you just wasted half the year almost.
And it gets worse. I know I've shared this story, right? When I went over many, many decades ago, when I took over a regional office, they were investing in lending, and if they had a great end of the year, they kind of sloughed off at the beginning of the year, really for the first 2 quarters. And then they scrambled to put out additional capital over the last 2 quarters. And every year that they scrambled, they had bad deals. And the years where they didn't scramble, they had good deals, right? And so they had this really bad cycle
Volatility does not lend well to the benefits of compounding.
No pun intended, right? So in any way, it's just like, no, don't do that to yourself, right? Don't.
Yeah,
right.
well, and I think
it's the 20 mile or the 25 mile march.
Yeah. And right? I think most of us, or a lot, I don't know, me going through a school, you do that where it's like, oh yeah, I did fine in that test. It's like, it's whatever. And then usually you cram and then you get by, and it's just, that's the whole cycle. It's like, you don't do anything for 2 weeks, and 1 week you're like, well, and then the night before, like, I got to do something. And sometimes that works. Sometimes you show up to the test and you don't even know how to guess on it because you don't know enough stuff, which is, because it's all of those things are there for a reason. Yeah. Great companies are built on agreements.
Yeah. So, this is my classic discussion around expectations versus agreements, right?
I feel like we already talked about this entirely, but it is a new rule in the list.
Yeah, but it's not one we've talked about today, right?
We talked about the value agreements, but we haven't. Has been an explicit chapter in this episode.
Yeah, but get rid of the expectations. They're cowardly, they're toxic, they're bullying, they're lazy, right? We need to create agreements. And as I say, agreements are everywhere, right? Your core values are agreements, your compelling value propositions agreements, your ICPs are agreements, your structures an agreement, the roles, accountabilities, and responsibilities associated with your seat are agreements, your KPIs are agreements. These are the things that help us understand whether things are going really, really well. The targets associated with, yes, there's an issue, no, there's not an issue, things are going well, are agreements, right? They're just, agreements are everywhere, in my opinion. It's funny, Chris Snyder, our Chief Revenue Officer, and I were talking yesterday, he's now just as bad as I am about saying it's all math, right? But to me, it's all math and it's all agreements, right? Math and agreements, right? And if you understand the math and then you put in place really good agreements and then you live up to your agreements, if you don't live up to your agreements, you have a conversation. Was it you? Was it me? Is it something else? And then if people don't live up to their agreements, then that's an easy conversation. Hey, it's really tough for me to have a healthy relationship with someone who doesn't honor their agreements. And so, but it's like everything, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And so it takes time to enter into agreements.
And make things mathable.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of things where it's unknown. It's like, okay, we have a theory on how this is going to work mathematically, logically, but you have to explore that territory before you actually can make it explicit.
Yeah. Yeah. So I see, agreements are everywhere, and it takes time to figure out what the good ones should be, what's really important. But, as we say a lot of times, all the time, maybe, right? None of this is that complicated. I get it. It's hard, right? But, I really, 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 really want people to become great company builders, right? And I want leaders to become, great leaders. And I think to be great, you got to do great. And sorry, but I want you to do that. I want you to do it for yourself. I want you to do it for your family. I want you to do it for your employees. I want you to do it for all of your ideal stakeholders, right? Just do it.
Yeah. I'm not sorry about it.
Yeah.
All right. Finally.
Yeah.
Great companies are built to last.
Right. That's everything we've just talked about, right? It's you are playing that infinite game. You're doing the hard work to make sure everybody understands what's important, make sure that we're having great, healthy conversations, we're creating a great culture, we're creating high trust relationships, we're playing an infinite game that we want to play. We enjoy the game, right? And you said it earlier, right? You said,
well, it's like, don't hate the player, hate the game. Don't hate the game, love the game because you're in it.
Yeah. And if you don't want to play the game, then don't play the game.
Yeah.
Right? But go find a game that you'd love to play. Go find a game where you wake up the next morning, right? You go to bed, you go home at night, and you're like, 90+% of the time, I love the game I'm playing, right? Michael Jordan, Kobe, lots of different people, right? They had they just had such intense passion for the game. And, Jordan had the Jordan rule, which was he was allowed to go play pickup ball, right? And I was around in those days in Chicago, right? And I would go to the gym and there's Michael Jordan playing pickup ball in the gym. It's like, this is crazy, right? But, but he loved the game.
No, it's like Max Verstappen being allowed to do sim racing or whatever, like the night before a race. It's like, oh, he's gonna do it. Yeah, he'll be fine. Yeah, it's on him if he but he wants to do that because he loves racing. Yeah, and it's like he's got to do a 24-hour e-racing the night before, which is objectively stupid. From a thing, it's like you're probably not going to perform as well, but it's the love of the thing that makes the difference. And so you're not going to tell Jordan that the thing that he wants to do, you can't do. You're going to tell Kobe that. You're not going to tell Verstappen that. Right. It's like you got to let them do the thing, and there's an overabundance of love and passion for the game that they're playing. Yeah.
And so, find a game that you just want to you just want to continue to play, right? And I think that, I'm genuinely sad that lots of people look at work as something that they've got to do. They haven't figured out how to find work that they haven't figured out how to find a game that they just love to play and get better at, right? And to find that game where, you genuinely like Jordan, right? You just love playing it, right? And when you
it is it's not a means to an end. It is the end in itself.
Yeah. Life is long. Find a game that you're good at, that you want to become even better at. Find other players that you want to play with, right? That you respect and that you can learn from, right? And then just but then approach it with humility, because right, you are going to get knocked down. You're going to have a moment. You're going to piss someone off. Someone's going to piss you off, right? But have the perspective that I'm learning from all of this. I'm not perfect, as I like to say. Right? You have your definition of humility. Mine is, in 3 short years, I'm not a little bit embarrassed about who I am today, then I haven't grown. Right?
There's a lot of definitions.
Yeah.
They're all
good.
All good.
Yeah.
Right? But all of those challenges are helping you become better at the game.
Yeah.
And you becoming better at the game helps others become better at the game. Yeah. It makes it a better game.
Yeah, because if you and we could do a whole nother, there's lots of research we'd love to do on this, right? But if you don't find a game that you enjoy playing, right, then the chances are you're kind of going to be miserable, because, right, then it's like, well, I don't love anything I'm doing. I'm kind of mopey and who wants to go through life like that?
I don't know. I think there's an overabundance of apathy at the moment.
Yeah.
And obviously we're working on addressing that.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen anytime soon.
Right.
But we're working on it.
Yeah.
Because I think, we agree that that's a significant issue.
Yeah.
And doesn't have to be.
Doesn't have to be. It's part of what we're trying to do, is trying to help people thrive, help organizations thrive, help people create communities that make it easier, not easier, right? But help people thrive and be there to support people. And we all go through moments, right? We're all, as I say, we're all going to get knocked in the face, and just, if you're enjoying the game and you're learning, and for the most part, the people you're playing with are people you love playing the game with, then, you're going to get back up and, going to get back to it.
9 characteristics.
9 characteristics.
Thank you.
Thank you.